Higgins.
Australia is caught up in an inflationary challenge that is indeed sweeping the world. Yes, our headline inflation rate is too high at 7%. In the UK, it is currently 8.7%, New Zealand 6.7%, Germany 6%. The only bright spot here is the United States. The United States inflation has drastically come down. It's sitting at around 5%, when it peaked in this time last year, June of last year, at 9%, and that should offer some hope for us. Now, the issue here is that Australia is in this position when it didn't need to be struggling like this, and we're in this position because those opposite removed the shock absorbers from our economy. And what were those shock absorbers? They were around energy, they were around housing, they were around supply chain, including labour and skills. And had they actually been addressed, then our country would have been able to buffer itself from these economic headwinds and from a black swan event, which we all know about. The pandemic, now also affected by the threat multiplier of climate change, which is very much upon us. What is not discussed, unfortunately, is that under those opposite, they actually poured high-octane fuel over this inflationary problem. And it surprises me that no one has actually talked about this. There was a report that came out in the Fin Review in April of this year, and it cited a respected economist, Chris Murphy, who actually had done an analysis. And what he showed was the stimulus under those opposite of approximately $429 million added an additional 3 points of inflation. So instead of having an inflation problem of 7, we could have had an inflation problem of 4. And Australia, incidentally, was one of 5 countries in the OECD, a group of 38 mostly rich countries, that basically pumped too much stimulus into the economy during the early stages of the pandemic. So those opposite like to style themselves as the fiscal guardians of this nation. They're meant to be the fiscal conservatives. Instead, what we had was a demonstration of fiscal incontinence. Incontinence. Now, I can say that as a doctor. So our focus as a government is squarely on providing targeted cost of living relief, laying the foundations for our future prosperity, and putting our budget on a more sustainable footing so that we can actually provide those services that Australians rightfully expect, things like education and healthcare, for example. In terms of energy, we are going through an energy crisis we did not need to have. We were just simply overexposed to fossil fuels after a decade of policy chaos. With passage of our historic Climate Change Act, we have now delivered policy certainty. And what that has actually translated to was unprecedented investment in the fourth quarter of last year of $4.29 billion. That is final investment decisions were made last year, 10 times higher than the third quarter of last year. If that doesn't send a signal that Australia is open for business, then I don't know what does. We have also invested in and opened up 3 offshore wind zones around Australia, one in the Bass Strait. As we speak, there is a ship in the Bass Strait that is drilling. It is not drilling the seabed for gas. It is actually drilling the seabed where the footings of 300-metre tall wind turbines will stand. This is the future we are delivering for all young Australians. This is the future that they are going to seize. And those wind turbines, one day, will be made from green steel. Why? Because we invested $2 billion in that budget into green hydrogen. We've also invested $15 billion into making more things in Australia, a future made in Australia, investing in our sovereign capability, something those opposite voted against. It's absolutely baffling, considering that in the league table of the OECD, we are bottom of that list. We get the wooden spoon for self-sufficient manufacturing in our country. Now, these are all programs that are going to yield dividends in the longer term. But we know that people are struggling now, which is why we invested in tripling the bulk billing incentive in order to arrest the decline in bulk billing that we're seeing throughout the country. We've also brought in extended dispensing so that Australians pay less for their medicines. So I would say to you, Deputy Speaker, that there is a lot we're doing and we are future-focused.